All right, what's up, man? So, as I promised, I was going to talk about how food is affecting us, and that's what this video is. What I'm going to do is I am going to share my philosophy on eating because I think it's a lot different than what you're going to hear from other people. Then I'm going to share my protocol for eating and dieting. Then I'm going to share some of my advice based on my philosophy about sourcing food because I think it's a really important topic that a lot of people may think about, but they don't understand exactly why it's so important. And they don't understand some of the solutions available to them for sourcing food that would ensure that the food that they are getting is the healthiest food that they can eat. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the bigger societal problem with our food production and distribution. And because this channel is for high performing people who are trying to solve big problems in the world, I'm going to try to guide you guys towards a possible solution that if you are passionate about our food sourcing, that maybe you could start tackling taking on your local level, because I do think that it is something that is necessary for our society. But you'll hear more about this when we get to the problems. So let's start with my philosophy, because what I see is there's a lot of like trend diets or cookie cutter diets, is what I like to call them. And cookie cutter is a term that I took from construction because it explains the production of housing. When you go into a neighborhood and all the houses look the same, or you see a house being built and it, instead of taking a couple weeks to be built, it's up in a week or less, it's because it's a cookie cutter house. And what that means is that it is designed exactly like every other house on that street. There were no detailed measurements taken before for planning and preparation. They didn't consider how big the basement needed to be, or how big the walls needed to be in the basement, or how far they should dig. It's just this generic plan for building a house. And what you see when a house is built like this is that it does not last as long as a house that is customized for where it is being built and its purpose. And I think when you think about your diet and you're building yourself up physically, we see the same thing societally. We have all these influencers who kind of just give people these fad diets, and some of them do work, but it's taking away a lot of the agency from individuals. And it's a good developmental point for people to begin establishing the diet that works best for them. The same way when building a house, you would build the house the best way that you can for the area that it is being built. Though, as most things in our society, it is all becoming cookie cutter. And I think that's really the big problem, is that people aren't taking on the responsibility of understanding how they actually work with the inputs that they are taking in for food or supplementation, and they aren't considering how that would vary based on their outputs. And for me, like, I've never done the calorie counting thing. I don't believe there's a one size fit all. How I actually structure my diet is know what I am doing each day, and I eat for what I am doing each day. And that's what we're going to kind of get into with my protocol. But I also think that, you can take from some of the diets, because that's what I do. I take from the carnivore diet or the high protein, low carb diets. I take the ideas from fasting. I take some of the ideas that I got from powerlifting with even carb loading. And I take all of these ideas and I experiment on myself with it. And I think that's something that if you really want to get fit and healthy, you're better off kind of experimenting on yourself, finding a baseline for your optimized like diet, and then like finding where you will add certain meals for certain types of performance. And what that's going to allow you to do is figure out how you need to eat for your own performance. If you aren't working out like a high performing CrossFitter, then you probably don't want to eat the same way a high performing CrossFitter eats. If you aren't doing powerlifting, then you probably don't want to eat the same way a 400-pound powerlifter would eat. And at the same time, if you are just living your daily life, you're going to work and you're finding moments of deep work, you don't want your diet to be affecting you when you're trying to get into these states of deep work. So there are ways to work around that. And you basically have to try something, realize where it's affecting you, that you can't get into these states of deep work, or you don't have the energy that you need for a workout or something like that. And then, adapt your diet based on that. So that's something that I've been doing for years as a wrestler. A lot of it was just fasting until I got down to weight. And then after my matches, I would go do a bunch of carb loading with a bunch of other crap. But then I moved on from wrestling and got more into my powerlifting, CrossFit types workouts. And then I really just started to realize, how I could eat for performing there. Then I moved into working in construction, which was very long days. And I realized very quickly that like how I was eating for powerlifting was not going to work when I was working 12-hour days, getting in and out of the trucks and moving a bunch of equipment around. So I had to recalibrate for that. And now I don't do so much construction. I still do a lot of manual labor just for my own sake. But I do a lot more deep work sitting at a desk. And, I have to find ways to not get distracted. And I do know that, when you start eating in the morning, if it's something like very sugary or anything like that, once that metabolizes, your brain is going to want more. And that's kind of where your like ADHD mind comes from, or this inattentive mind where you can't stay at your desk because something comes up and you want to walk or you want to go grab something. So I've found ways to work around that. And none of this is just a generic thing. I have 3 meals a week that I use based on what I'm going to do. And that's kind of what I want to start instilling in people. But I think this does more than just allows you to optimize your diet. It's optimizing yourself for whatever you plan to do later on in the future too. That's going to be bigger, hopefully. I wasn't always doing a bunch of research and writing papers and all this things that I'm doing now. But because I had such a good foundation from my earlier years, I was able to carry it forward with me, and I've been able to optimize better than I think I could have predicted that I would be right now. So I'm going to share with you like my 3 different protocols that I have based on what I'm doing. This could change daily, but sometimes it's more of a seasonal thing because sometimes, in the winter, I try to bulk up a little bit more. So I'm going to change up my diet. And I'm also not as active outside. So I can kind of allow myself to be a little bit more tired later in the day, and I will eat more. Then there's like the summer where I'm going to be doing a lot of things. I'm going to be doing some type of construction at my own house, working on my garden or something like that, maybe taking my son for long hikes. I try to like not allow myself to eat the carbs because then I will get tired early in the day. But there is an exact protocol that we're going to get into right now. So one of the methods that I use to optimize my mind and body for performance is fasting. When I fast, it's usually anywhere between 18 to 48 hours, and I will do this several times in the week at the 18-hour mark. Usually when I'm running the 48-hour fast, it's for the purpose of detoxing after like a cheap weekend is what I call it. It's usually like me and my wife, we went away for the weekend. We spent the night at a hotel, so we got some wine, maybe ordered some junk food, all those types of things. And, once I get home, I decide, okay, I'm going to not eat. I'm going to still drink water and take my supplementation. But I got to do about 48 hours of just detoxing by fasting. It works out really well for me. The reason that I optimize most of the time is so that I can still enjoy my time when I'm with my wife or my family or anyone else and not have to really worry about what am I eating or how's it going to make me gain weight or anything like that. I don't really think about that so much because I just do so much now that, detoxing is really just for the cognitive benefit of, a clear mind. Because when you eat too much, your midbrain will send more signals to your cortex. And that's kind of what creates some cravings. And then I also use fasting for when I'm doing deep work. And with the deep work that I'm talking about where I have to fast is usually after like 3 or 4 days of brainstorming for the deep work, meeting with people, coming up with a game plan or something. And then it's like, okay, now it's time to execute. And that means I'm going to be sitting at my desk. Usually I like my deep work to be like 4 hours, but A lot of times with the bigger projects, it could be like 6 or 8 hours. So I try to completely remove food because, as I said before, once you start eating and your brain basically metabolizes it and your gut metabolizes everything, your brain's going to start sending signals that you want more. That's what a craving really is. So when you learn how to fast and diminish those cravings, it helps with everything else, especially things like deep work. And it's up to you how much you do it, if you want to do 18 or 48 hours, but it's definitely a good reset. And I also used to use fasting to kind of recalibrate myself. When I wasn't like the best at dieting, I would fast and then I would begin integrating things slowly to see how it affected me. So I would fast and then I would do eggs and then I would throw my bacon in, and then I would do carbs or something and I would see how I was affected, or a protein shake and see how I was affected. It kind of brings you to this baseline, which is really good. And then you can begin optimizing from there. But I also have like a diet that I do on a regular basis. I actually took a lot of it from CrossFit because their idea is to eat meat and vegetables, some fruits, a little bit of starch, and no sugar. And I think that's kind of for a day to day, just maintaining being able to perform. That works really well. Though I did change that up a little bit. I do a lot of low carb or no carb, but that's primarily in the morning. Every morning, when I get home from the gym, my wife makes my breakfast. I get 3 eggs and 3 pieces of bacon. Then, when I go out either to work or to school, I take a bag of peanuts or other types of nuts with me that I just kind of munch on for the day. I used to take a protein shake, but then I found out that the protein shake had a binder in it that was causing inflammation. I would end up getting some hip pain every time I drank it. I gave it up for about 2 weeks. The hip pain completely went away. I haven't taken it since then, and I'm pretty much just opting out of a lot of protein shakes because the way that they are produced is not the most healthy way for humans. So I stay away from that. I have recently gotten into a lighter protein of collagen protein that I use. I mean, I haven't had any negative effects from that, so I'm gonna consistently use that. And then like if I do choose to like take carbs in, it is like early afternoon. I might have like a high fat, high protein Greek yogurt that has fruit on the bottom, or I might have like a banana. And the banana helps because I take magnesium at night. So the potassium from the banana actually enhances the effects of magnesium. If you are low in potassium, the magnesium doesn't really work right. And then it's usually my dinner where I will have a big plate of meat. My wife makes my dinner. She'll like make a big pot roast or something with ground beef or chicken or pork. And usually there's potatoes, vegetables, and if we do bread, it's usually homemade bread. We've gotten away from buying store-bought bread most of the time. You have to optimize as best as you can. Sometimes it's not always easy to just make homemade bread, so we have to use something else. I would prefer not to. I like when she makes the homemade bread. But this really is like just for maintaining on a day-to-day basis where the routines are pretty much the same thing. The work I'm going to be doing is the same thing. This works really well. I can get into really good deep work with the low carb diet. And usually after I'm done with the deep work, because these are shorter sessions on days I'm eating like this, after I'm done with that, that's usually when I'll go have my banana or my yogurt. And then something else I do, a lot of people don't do this, but I do this because sometimes I really pick up the intensity on my workouts where the intensity is really high. Maybe it's like in the morning I'm running a few miles or I'm sprinting and things like that. And then also the frequency of my workouts are going up. So while I'm running in the morning, I'm doing big powerlifting at night, and this is usually when I'm getting ready for something. Also, when I'm doing jujitsu, if I'm training multiple times a day, I'll be doing some type of carb loading, usually the day before. I don't like to carb load actually on the day that I'm performing. I like to carb load ahead of time, even a couple days ahead. And usually this is like a once a week type of thing when I'm actually doing it, because the rest of the time I'm doing that like low carb kind of thing. And at the end of the week, I'll load up on carbs. It's kind of disgusting, honestly, but it works really well for me. Once I do that, I kind of get replenished the next few days. My workouts get more intense. And because I don't do this regularly, I don't see that I have a problem with it. So this is what I'm trying to just show you. Want to eat for your performance. You don't want to just eat the same thing because that's what seems to work, or somebody else gave you that workout or gave you that diet, because you're probably missing out on a lot of other pieces that would optimize you even more for different types of performance. And what they're really going to just do is just get me into the next thing, because as you saw, I do source my meat from a farm. It's a local farm. And that's important right now, because the sourcing of food could be very risky, especially with the genetically modified foods that we're seeing. A lot of it is the plants that are modified, right? 90 to 95% of corn, soy, and cotton produced in the United States is genetically modified. And I'm not fully against genetically modified foods. What I am against is the reason that they are genetically modified. It is for production and for profit. It is not to enhance the quality of the food for the consumer. And I think that's the biggest problem. I do have some supplements that I take that I know are bioengineered, but they were bioengineered specifically so that they could be produced to serve the function that they are produced for. Usually it's like my to-go protein. But what I see is with a lot of the other foods, so the plants are actually being genetically modified, which means that they will take out genes and put in a new gene so it begins acting a certain way when it is growing, and they will make them resistant to herbicides, which most herbicides will have glyphosate in them. And glyphosate is considered a potential carcinogen, though when you look up the research, it's very hard to find. And there seems to be a lot of debate, but I would say this has more to do with the production and profit benefits than it does with the actual science. There are ways to actually find out if the produce in your store is genetically modified. It legally has to be labeled, but a lot of the food that we actually get isn't actually genetically modified. What they do is they use the genetically modified food to feed the animals, and then the animals are getting the genetically modified food. So what they're doing with like the genetically modified food that is meant to resist pests is they insert a gene that allows the plant to create a new protein that will kill the insects. So if the insect eats the plant, the insect dies. Now, animals are a lot bigger if they're giving them to cows or chicken or anything like that. But if it's killing the insect, what do we think it's doing to the meat? Let's just be realistic here. If it is killing that insect, what could it be doing to the meat? And then, the meat gets butchered and it goes to you and you eat it. So that's really why I try to stay away from the mainstream food sources when I can. It's not the easiest thing to do. And some people aren't going to have a negative effect from it. I'll be honest, I never really had a negative effect from the meat, but the fact that I know that's happening, I had to stay away from it. There were other things like binders and dairy that I realized were having a negative effect and creating inflammation that I had to stay away from. But I do think there are a lot of people who are going to be affected by the new proteins that are being introduced into the food source. So that's why I really think where you source your food is probably even more important than the actual diet. As I said, they also try to make the plants tolerant of herbicides. So this is things like Roundup, and the Roundup has glyphosate in it. And the cancer institutions do believe that the glyphosate is a carcinogen, which means that it will likely give you cancer. Though when we look at some of the bigger organizations like WHO and the FDA, they say it is unlikely to cause cancer, which isn't enough evidence for me to say, okay, well, I want to use that. So what I've actually had to do is come up with a solution to sourcing my food. There's several things that I just do that make it easier to make sure that the food I get is healthier. And I'm going to share those with you. They do take some work to do, but it's worth doing. This is the foundation of you. So take the time to make that foundation solid and strong. So if you are buying your food from a grocery store, then what you really just want to do is look for the organic label. There are identifiers of genetically modified food through the barcode. I think the number that you're going to be looking for is an 8 at the beginning, and it's a 5-digit barcode. And that indicates that the food has been genetically modified. The label organic is a useful label, except you need to understand that there are still going to be things that are labeled organic that are not fully organic. And also, labeling of natural does not mean organic. It just means that it naturally occurs in nature. So try to go organic. My eggs and bacon are often sourced from a grocery store, except I have a few neighbors around who do grow their own eggs and they will give me them. But I'll be honest, even some of them have genetically modified chickens that lay blue eggs. So it is more common than you would think that things are genetically modified. Though I haven't had any problems with those eggs. So I still do eat them. The bigger thing I would say is where you source your bulk meat. Things like your beef and pork and chicken. I would definitely try to find a local farm. That's what I do. I have a farm about 3 miles away from my house. We put an order in at the beginning of spring that we're going to be sourcing our meat from them. And every month they send bags of meat. We can freeze it. You will have to get used to eating the unenhanced meat because it doesn't look as good as some of the store-bought stuff, but it's way healthier and it does taste often much better. And then also, as I brought up a little bit earlier, is making your own bread. I think, a big part of being healthy is a strong microbiome. We have the enteric nervous system, which directly is connected to your brain and your autonomic nervous system. That's why when you get a gut feeling that something is wrong, it starts sending signals. Or if you ate something bad, it's going to quickly send signals to your brain that it needs to start fighting whatever it is. So I really do believe in eating at least some carbs because they are good for your microbiome. But I would stay away from these store-bought things because, a lot of that is bioengineered and a lot of that is coming from crops that have the pesticide resistance or herbicide tolerance. And, there's also the benefit of supporting a local farm. There used to be several farms in my area, though a lot of them are closing down. And this is what I'm going to be talking about when we get into the next part, which is the broader social problem that I think, if you're somebody who's passionate about food sourcing and things like that, may be worth kind of tackling. I think people can really do this on a local level. I do my own gardening, but I think that this could be done at a little bit bigger level on the local scale. And like if you got really good at it and you had like automated systems using technology, I think this is probably the future. I don't think everybody wants these companies to be in control of our seeds or to continue modifying our food for their own profit and their own production ease. I brought this up in a debate I recently had a couple months ago, actually. There's the options for greenhouses that you can consider, and I kind of just want to talk about this because, societally, our food is centralized. The corporations have control of the seeds. They continuously modify the seeds for their benefit, which is reducing the biodiversity within the environment. So now, if our weather actually did start changing or anything like that, we wouldn't have the seeds that can grow in a new environment because it is becoming so uniform. And so what I would suggest is, for yourself, begin like a small garden. Get some animals if you wanted to. That could take a little bit longer. But then, try to take what you produce and distribute it. That's pretty much what goes on where I live is this local farm sends out a flyer to everybody locally and says, "Hey, put in your orders now and we'll have your meat for the rest of the year." And I think more places would benefit from this. It's a really good solution, and you'll know that you're supporting a local business. We will be able to keep local businesses open. The technology would be a lot of fun to use, and it's something that could really scale. It would first allow you to optimize, figure out what works best for you, like what types of crops would you want to grow? What type of animals would you like to keep? And then for your health, what works? And then, more broadly distribute that, sell it, and then like find more ways to do that on a broader scale. Maybe going into other neighborhoods or another town or city near you, trying to find new innovative ways to produce crops and vegetation and livestock within those environments because, right now everything is happening at one location, one centralized location, and we don't have a lot of control of our food. And I think this is the way to fix that. So that's what I have. I think that, this is a good foundation to get started. And I think that there are a lot more things that I could address, but this is kind of like at the macro scale. This is how you get started. As I said, I'm not going to tell you what diet to do. I think more people should be taking the time to optimize, figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And I'll talk about some more in future episodes, so make sure to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.